It is still not entirely clear how the ideas of Nazism were able to turn tens of thousands of seemingly normal people into soulless killers. But the fact does not change. This happened. For just one example, Jenny-Wanda Barkmann wanted to change her career as a fashion model for the career of an executioner, a sweet girl, or how people referred to her, Sweet Jenny, whom her parents were proud of and who, it would seem, was intended for only one thing alone: to shine on the podium. She was a very young and curious and live girl, with possibility of huge prospects. What was she missing in her life that she decided to do something that ended up being gallows? On Ex-War History will tell you her story, her deeds, and the end of this woman. Modest girl. But at the initial stage, Jenny-Wanda's life path could serve as an example of a kind of fulfilled dream for ordinary girls of Germany. Barkmann's managed to advance and achieve good professional success, having actually modest conditions at the beginning. She was originally from Hamburg. Her mother was a housewife and her father was either a sailor or a worker in the port. In general, a more than financially poor family. Jenny's birthday is most often indicated as May 30th, 1922. But there are also alternative options, May 22nd or even May of 1921. No one sought to preserve information about the girl who seemed to be a completely ordinary child without peculiarities. And a few days and even a year do not really matter. The pivotal moments were these. Jenny-Wanda entered a more or less conscious period just in the period of the victory of Hitler ideology in Germany. It is not known how Jenny studied at school, who her friends were, what influence she had, whether she had any cultural interests. One fact has been preserved: she was attractive in her appearance. Now, looking at her surviving photos, many are surprised. They say, nothing special, right? But it should be remembered that the ideas of beauty and the ideal woman are different at different times. And Jenny-Wanda apparently had not only the right features, but also what is called a charm. She knew how to please. She inspired confidence within men and women. She seemed naive, feminine, and pure. Be that as it may, but it was the appearance that young Jenny made her tool on the way to career heights. After graduating from school, she became a fashion model, starred for commercials and various posters. Offers poured in from all sides, from fashion magazines to men's magazines. Barkmann's did not refuse any offer, so inviting photos of a half-naked beauty with an angelic face shown in magazines for men, and the Nordic profile of the blonde beauty excited soldiers and officers in Nazi Germany. In modern sources, she is sometimes called a supermodel, but this is not really true, at least not in the modern sense, but rather in the context of that time. Jenny Barkmann did not have large-scale fame and didn't receive gigantic fees. However, she was certainly successful in her profession and had no shortage of good offers. And therefore, it is very difficult to understand why Jenny suddenly decided to give up her peaceful, rather prestigious and well-paid job in order to become a guard in a concentration camp, where simple people suffered on a daily basis. It's unlikely that she really needed the benefits provided there in conditions of work. The only thing left to do is to involve psychology. But psychiatrists recognized Barkmann as sane and fully capable of realizing the consequences of her actions. This also doesn't hurt to take into account. Career of a butcher. Already in 1942, due to the shortage of personnel in the concentration camps, the German authorities announced the recruitment of civilian people for the positions of concentration camp guards, as well as other conditionally service personnel of the death camps. Potential candidates were allured by high salaries, various benefits, as well as career prospects up to the head of the camp. Jenny-Wanda Barkmann began working as a warden in January of 1944. That is, definitely late. Her career lasted only for a year, but this was enough to create a reputation for the former model as a dangerous and creepy killer. Her place of service was the Stutthof concentration camp, which in 1944 essentially functioned as an extermination camp. Stutthof. Stutthof was the first of all concentration camps to be established in the occupied territories. The founding date is considered to be September 2nd, 1939, right after the beginning of the attack on Poland. The first prisoners were representatives of the Gdansk intelligent Stradov population. Then captured Polish soldiers and civilians were sent to the camp. The camp expanded rapidly, by 1944 occupying almost 120 hectares of land. and what happened on these hectares cannot be comprehended even now. The Stutthof concentration camp system was one of the worst crimes of the Nazis by far. Until June 1941, the main inmates of the camp were Poles, Polish Jews, and Germans sent for re-education for minor faults. As for the Germans, the terms of imprisonment ranged from 15 to 70 days. In reality, many did not live to see their release. Officially, a total of about 120,000 people passed through the camp, of which about 80,000 were brutally killed. Immediately upon arrival, the initial sorting of prisoners was carried out. Those who could not work, specifically the elderly, the sick, and teenagers, were immediately sent to the gas chamber. Here's what one of the prisoners told about the arrangement. "We stood in rows, and the Nazi walked around and looked at who could not work. Children of 14 years old, like me, were sent to the gas chamber. My dad poured sand into my shoes to make me taller. The Nazi stopped next to me and asked how old I was. I said, 17 and a half. The German said, it seems to be true, and afterwards left me alone." The conditions in the camp were terrible. Prisoners were forbidden to speak their native language. It was forbidden to call each other by name. The guards themselves addressed the prisoners as none other than bastards. The slightest offense was followed by cruel punishment, from beating to half death to execution. The sick and weak were killed by injections of phenol and other poisons or sent to gas chambers without hesitation. There were both men and women in the camp. Women were involved in cleaning, washing, sewing, and the most beautiful were taken to the brothel for assessed men created in the camp itself. After the forced sexual worker made them bored or could not perform her duties, she was sent to the gas chamber. The average life expectancy in the camp did not exceed 2 or 3 months, and the crematorium simply could not cope with the amount of people. Half-burned corpses were taken to the forest and buried in the fastest way. To this day, especially after the rains, mushroom pickers a few kilometers from the camp stumble upon half-charred bones of prisoners. In Stutthof, a real conveyor belt for the gradual extermination of people was established. Prisoners were poisoned with Zyklon B in gas chambers, and bodies were burned in several crematoriums that had been built. Apart from it, those sentenced to extermination were infected with pathogens of typhoid fever, typhus, and other infections, organizing mass epidemics after which no one survived. No less terrible were the medical experiments carried out on prisoners. The women were treated with X-rays, exposed to various chemicals and horrific surgeries, but the experiments were unsuccessful and all the suffering test subjects were sent to the gas chamber. Another experiment conducted on prisoners was poisoning with mustard gas. Moreover, scientists did not just poison people, but tried to find the dependence of the level of damage on age, gender, and nationality. Some of the lucky were then treated by developing medical methods for the recovery of the victims, just for the sake of experiments. It was to such a terrible place that the former supermodel decided to work, and she directly and indirectly had her influence in every aspect. Who she was in the camp. Barkmann's prisoners, as already mentioned, were mainly Jews from different countries, Poles as well as Soviet citizens. A significant part were children and women, and it was they who were in the area of responsibility of Jenny-Wanda. There were self-proclaimed gods in the camp, guards and wards, and the uncomplaining quiet flock, prisoners. From her first days as a warden, Jenny-Wanda Barkmann showed herself to be one of the most cruel and inventive guards, whose torture astonished even experienced SS men. The prisoners very soon nicknamed Barkmann Charming Ghost and Mad Jenny. The fact was that it was simply impossible to expect from a delicate on the outside girl with an angelic appearance the level of atrocities that she committed against other people. The former fashion model was especially fond of Jewish and Polish women. The reasons for this were never explained, and we can still guess the reasons for this. She severely punished the prisoners for any slightest offense. The favorite method was beating with a thin leather belt. According to witnesses who survived this hell, she beat several dozen women to death with this weapon alone. Barkmann's second favorite pastime was the separation of mothers and children. She experienced certain abnormal pleasure when she took the child from the mother and in front of her eyes sent the baby to the gas chamber. Many, if we may say so, standard types of torturing the victims, the former fashion model improved, making her victims go insane. She whipped the offenders on the heels with a belt, beat them with a rubber stick, and sent the trained dogs to them. She often invited local doctors to her experiments, who conducted inhuman experiments on the unfortunates in the camp. According to the memoirs of former prisoners, during the beating of the guilty to death, the face of an angel suddenly changed to the face of a mad demon. The mask of madness that appeared on Barkmann's face at such a moment frightened even her Nazi colleagues. The duties of the warden included ensuring that the prisoners strictly followed the rules of the camp, supervising the performance of various works, as well as punishing the guilty, selecting candidates for sending to the gas chambers, and accompanying the doomed to the horrible place. Jenny-Wanda was a conscientious worker. She especially enjoyed the process of punishment and the procedure for selecting candidates for execution. There are also mentions of how Barkmann met newcomers. Many immediately fell into the trap of looking at the sweet and affectionate woman who was, on their opinion, genuinely smiling at the prisoners. With the same sweet smile, she could treat the child to candy with poison and then enjoy the screams of the poor mother, whom she later beat cruelly for showing disrespect. Everyone was afraid of Barkmann to such an extent that they were afraid of even an accidental glance in her direction, because at best it meant a gas chamber, and at worst, a painful death to the bestial screams of pleasure of this beast in the form of woman. Among the female guards of Stutthof, Barkmann was the most beautiful, and presumably the youngest of all wards. She took care of herself, was always neat and well-groomed, knew how to hold herself, had pleasant manners. Of course, all this only to the extent that it did not interfere with the performance of her official duties. An escape. The Stutthof camp was evacuated by the Nazis at the end of January 1945. Prisoners were driven west in several columns. It is known that around this period, Jenny Barkmann disappeared. However, there was nothing surprising in this. On the eve of the imminent collapse of Hitler's regime, many guards sought to hide. She managed to hide for several months, and it was never possible to find out who was the person or a group of people who helped her to hide. However, Jenny Barkmann was put on the wanted list, and the Polish authorities just dreamed of getting her. She was arrested in May 1945 at the Gdansk railway station. The woman was waiting for the train. There is evidence that Jenny-Wanda took her exposure completely philosophically and without any regret at the moment, and she even paid a kind of compliment to the counterintelligence officers who detained her. What? I thought that we had the best bloodhounds in Stutthof. While in court, Jenny-Wanda was put on trial in May 1946 in what was known as the First Stutthof Trial. Several other female guards were tried together with her, and those present at the trial noted that the defendants did not show any signs of fear or remorse whatsoever. During the investigation, Barkmann spoke outright nonsense. At the initial stages of trial, she stated that she was forced to become a guard, as the Gestapo threatened to repress her family. When this could not be proved, Barkmann voiced a new version. She said that she was an anti-fascist who voluntarily went to work in the camp in order to alleviate the lot of the unfortunate prisoners as much as possible. Here, the testimony of witnesses played against her. In the end, resigned to her fate, Jenny-Wanda calmed down, realizing that her sentence was obvious. The Poles would not forgive in any way what she did in the concentration camp. Consequently, at the trial, Barkmann behaved quite impudently, greeting all the accusations with a smile and sometimes even talking with bravado about her own methods of torture and the destruction of prisoners. It was at the trial that the details of Barkmann's activities as a warden were revealed, and we can say with confidence this was a really interested worker. Surviving prisoners gave details explaining why the beautiful Jenny was awarded the nicknames Beautiful Ghost, Mad Jenny, and even Blood Beast. It was claimed that the sadistic ingenuity of Barkmann and her fellow guards was sometimes simply inadequately horrendous. There is no doubt that Jenny Barkmann on a regular basis selected prisoners to be sent to the gas chambers. At the same time, she took bizarre pleasure in the selection of children whom, among other things, she could take from mothers who were still alive and holding their children. The warden loved to punish, and this was expressed in her systematic beatings of prisoners with or without reason. She could beat a person to death for not working fast enough. She did it with her own hands. Since the female guards worked almost exclusively with women and children, it's not difficult to guess that Barkmann had many reasons to entertain her sadistic self, because they were the weakest and most helpless prisoners. It is also known that she loved to invent the tortures that were more creepy than simple beatings. The number of victims of Stutthof is estimated differently, from 65 to 83,000 people. Of course, Jenny Barkmann, who began her service in 1944, was not involved in all of these murders. In essence, the court has not decided how many people she killed herself and directly sent to the gas chambers. But in any case, the count was in the hundreds, or rather in the thousands of human lives. Another escape attempt. In addition, Wanda tried to escape from prison. Corporal Joseph Lass was one of her guards. He was Jewish by nationality, and all his relatives were sacrificed to Hitler's final solution to the Jewish question. And so Jenny-Wanda began to tell him about her innocence, about malicious slander and attempts to blame other people's crimes on her. She even claimed that just a few hours at large would have given her the opportunity to obtain and provide the investigation with some evidence that would fully justify her and expose the conspiracy organized against this poor woman. Oh yeah, this young woman knew how to treat men. Poor Joseph Lass was literally half a step away from giving the arrested woman the same a few hours at large, but when he accidentally got the chance to familiarize himself with some documents from her case, he didn't say a single word to Jenny. Jenny dressed carefully for each court session, did neat hairstyles. She behaved completely calm, as if what was happening was just a carefully improvised spectacle and nothing else. Her lawyer, and yes, Nazi criminals were provided with lawyers during their trials, managed to offer only one argument in favor of his client: abnormality and official insanity. In his honest opinion, a mentally healthy person simply cannot do everything that she did. But then the psychiatrists intervened. They observed Jenny. Not even close was she to being abnormal mentally. The defendant was fully sane. The result is fully logical: a death sentence. After hearing this, Jenny remarked that life was too good a thing to be surprised that it ended rather quickly. Execution. The faint-hearted and gentle did not survive in those cruel and cold times, and the living burned with a fully justified thirst for revenge against Hitler's murderers. Thus, there was nothing to be surprised of in the public execution of death sentences in the first post-war years, and spectators gathered for such events en masse, completely voluntarily and even justly willingly. Everyone who survived this horror wanted to make sure that these specially odious characters were truly dead and would not be resurrected. Jenny-Wanda Barkmann and others sentenced to death at the first Stutthof trial were hanged in a place called Biskupska Gorka, near Gdansk. It all happened on July 4th, 1946. In total, up to 200,000 people came to admire the achievements of final justice, including many of the surviving prisoners of Stutthof and even Corporal Joseph Lass. In such executions at that time, technology was often used that made it possible to do it without a full-time executioner. The convict was placed in the open back of a small truck together with a guard. The truck drove up under the gallows. The guard put a noose around the neck of the convict. The command was given, and the truck drove away, causing the convict to be picked up in the noose. Jenny-Wanda, it must be said, behaved oddly usual, and it was during her hanging that a hitch suddenly arose. The truck didn't start. Yes, at that time no one paid attention to old beliefs like the broken rope, but the process got unpleasant for people because of a delay. And then, a withered woman jumped into Jenny's back, one of the miraculously surviving victims of Stutthof, and she pushed the convict, and Jenny just fell out of the truck. There are even pictures that depict the last moments of her life, the body on the side of the truck. For obvious reasons, we cannot show them to you. Fate after death. It's unknown in our times from where the legend of Barkmann's posthumous fate appeared. Allegedly, after being removed from the gallows, her body was cremated, the ashes were collected, taken to her homeland, Hamburg, and flushed down the toilet of the apartment where Mad Jenny grew up. The question of the legend is rather controversial. Well, let's ask this: who and why needed to bother so much? People at that time had a lot of other, much more important things to do. And besides, the posthumous fate of Jenny-Wanda, like those of others executed on July 4th, 1946, is known to public. After a short stay on the gallows, the bodies were removed and sent to the anatomical theater. So at the end of her life, the former model and former warden became a visual aid and a help for scientific research. The bodies were very useful for the training of medical students. This shows the highest justice possible. The cruel killer, after death, at least a little, but contributed to saving lives. And what was left of her after that was cremated, along with cut-out appendixes and other similar material. And then it was disposed of according to the rules provided for biowaste. And nothing mysterious or symbolic here. Again, finally, we will cite her exact quote, so to speak, the last words of the killer, which she understood of course in her own way. In the court materials, Barkmann's phrase is recorded, said after the verdict was pronounced. Life is really a great pleasure, and pleasure usually doesn't last long. This was X War History Channel. Subscribe, like, and comment. Also, you can watch our other episodes. Thank you for watching. Till next time.